Welcome to Paradigm Shift. Please let me know if you can hear me. L'chaim. Hi, Andy. Nice to see you. Beautiful to be here tonight on this very, very auspicious occasion of Gimel Tammuz. Today is the Yortzeit, the 26th Yortzeit of the Rebbe. And what could be more appropriate than to be learning the wisdom of the Rebbe. Paradigm Shift is a 6-session course, each week covering a revolution, an independent revolution that the Rebbe introduced to the world. And what I'm very excited to introduce tonight, and as part of our Paradigm Shift, 6 transformational ideas that the Rebbe gifted to the world. I'm very excited to introduce a paradigm shift when it comes to ourselves, how we view ourselves, other people, and our relationship with the universe. Whilst last week in Lesson 1 we spoke about a paradigm shift with regards to the world itself, tonight, I'm excited to talk to you about Lesson 2 of Paradigm Shift on the theme of redefining our true core, realizing our deepest potential. You know, here we are, we're in quarantine, and being stuck at home forces us to think deeply about ourselves. Without the external noise, without the social meetings, the business appointments, the cruises, the vacations, we're forced to ask ourselves, who are we really? What am I all about? What are our deepest aspirations? And I challenge you to think about that truth as well tonight. What are your deepest aspirations, your dreams and ambitions? What actions and phenomena will make you feel important? And what actions will make you feel the opposite? Our goal tonight is to take a deep dive, a deep plunge into who we are. Tonight's class is about you. It's about me. It's getting to know ourselves on a whole new level that perhaps we never even thought possible. Tonight we're going to see ourselves the way that the Rebbe sees us. A perspective which is both empowering as much as it is encouraging us to move forward. Indeed, we find that the Rebbe exhibited a paradox. On the one hand, the Rebbe exhibited a relentless push forward, constantly pushing everybody for more. Someone once said that, how did you know that the Rebbe was happy with your work? Was when the Rebbe asked you to do even more. On the one hand, the Rebbe was constantly pushing us for more. Why didn't you publish your book yet? You have more books to publish. There's so many more things that you have to do. But at the very same time, we know that the Rebbe exhibited this most unbelievable, unconditional love to every single Jew. He accepted each and every single Jew as they are, loving them for who they are, as they are. Which seems to be a paradox. How can it be that both of those truths can coexist? On the one hand, to love the person as he is, but at the same time to push him to be more. This is the question which frames our discussion tonight about who we are and how the Rebbe sees us. Because if we can climb into the Rebbe's perspective tonight, on the 26th anniversary of the Rebbe's Yortzeit and Gimel Tammuz, if we can climb into the Rebbe's shoes to see ourselves and each other the way that the Rebbe sees us, the result, my friends, is so incredibly liberating. This might just change your life. I'd like to welcome everybody here tonight. My name is Rabbi Dovid Vigler from Chabad of Palm Beach Gardens in Florida, and it's a pleasure to be your instructor during this course of Paradigm Shift. I welcome your questions in the Facebook feed over here at facebook.com/myjli/live, and would love to hear your feedback, your comments, your thoughts. It's always good to hear from you, L'chaim. We begin our discussion tonight with a Talmudic ruling. It's the law of the Supreme Court, which states that when the Supreme Court of 71 elders would convict someone to death, it was a very rare occurrence when they would do so, but when this would happen, when they would convict someone to death, it was done never by unanimous verdict. If all 71 of the sages in the court ruled that the person was liable for the death penalty, then the ruling was considered invalid. So says the Talmud Sanhedrin 17a, if the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court, unanimously agrees that a defendant is guilty in a capital case, then he is acquitted. And I ask you, what's the logic? Why? Doesn't it make sense that if everyone agrees that the defendant is guilty and worthy of the death penalty, doesn't it make sense that we should just execute him? Why would the Talmud say that you need at least one dissenting view in order to convict him to the death penalty? What's going on over here? This Talmudic question holds the key to our paradigm shift tonight, to a healthy perception of ourselves, a healthy perception of others, and to our aspirations. I'd like to ask you to like this video. If you could share this video, we'd share the wisdom of Torah, the Rebbe's gift to the world here tonight. If you could just share this video with your friends, let other people know that you're watching. It's great to be here tonight. Nice to see you, Susan and Andy from our community, and everybody else. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. Thank you for joining me on this journey of paradigm shift through the wisdom of the Rebbe. You know, we often speak about the Rebbe's charisma and the Rebbe's prophecy and the Rebbe's Menschlichkeit. But tonight, we're going to the core of the Rebbe, which is the Rebbe's Torah. Our connection to the Rebbe is through learning his Torah, and that's exactly what we're doing tonight. The Rebbe's very unique perspective, his chidush, his novel introduction to the world about how we can view ourselves and each other, a perspective that will change the way that you see others, but most importantly yourself, and that's happening tonight. So in order to understand this idea of how the Rebbe sees other people with that paradox we just spoke about, with unconditional love on the one hand, yet at the very same time, the Rebbe constantly, relentlessly was pushing us for more. When Rabbi Avraham Korf, the chief Chabad, the head shliach of Florida, excitedly announced to the Rebbe, when he first came out to Florida 50 years ago, he announced that they had given out, I think it was 4,000 menorahs on Hanukkah. The Rebbe's response to Rabbi Korf was, and what about the other 6,000 Jews of Miami? I don't remember the exact number, but it was certainly along those lines. What about all the Jews that have not yet received the menorah? What about them? You expect me to be satisfied? This was the Rebbe's relentless approach to constantly push us for more. How did the Rebbe view us, and how indeed should we be viewing ourselves? So let's build the case right now. We know that when it comes to viewing ourselves, there is the doctrine of dual consciousness, the doctrine of two souls. Our soul is our consciousness, and we have not one consciousness within us, we actually have two. These two souls, many of us have learned Tanya before. We're going to review this briefly, and then we're going to dive deeply. We're going to go scuba diving down into this in just a few moments. Let's introduce the doctrine of dual consciousness. This is that each and every one of us has not one but two souls within us. One is the natural soul. It is self-centered, self-oriented. And then there is a godly soul, which is literally a piece of God that God has infused, invested within each and every one of us. Whereas the natural soul is self-centered, the godly soul is God-centered. The natural soul asks what America can do for me, and the godly soul asks what I can do for America, what I can do for God. It's selfless as opposed to selfish. Now, there's nothing wrong with being self-centered. It's not like it's evil or anything. It's like an animal. It just doesn't have a higher consciousness. It's just self-serving. There's nothing wrong with being self-serving. It's not evil per se. It's just self-centered. It's self-oriented. Nothing more, nothing less. To quote the words of Tanya in chapters 1 and 2, every Jew, irrespective of his or her spiritual standing, possesses two souls. One of these souls, the mundane and unholy one, is the source of all undesirable human traits. The second soul of the Jew is a part of God above, literally. Now that word literally is going to be very, very important in a few moments, that the second soul within the Jew is literally, mamish, a piece of God. Now at the outset, it's interesting for us to realize, okay, I got no one of me in here, but there's actually two inside of me, two of me inside of this one body. Feels a little crowded, but okay, I'll run with it. At the outset, it seems that which soul of these two souls do we identify with? What do you say, friends? What do you identify with? You identify more with your natural soul or with your godly soul? With the soul that is self-centered or the soul that is God-centered? An honest reflection will probably allow us to realize that we do most of what we do for self-preservation. It is our natural soul that really drives us to do whatever we need to do. And our godly soul, no, it's like a guest, it's like a visitor. We feel that, I think that we can honestly reflect upon ourselves, most of us, and say that we are self-centered by default, by divine design. And that we harbor soulful and divine experiences. I am self-centered. That's who I am. It's what defines me. And it's my godly soul that also allows me to experience higher consciousness from time to time. Inspired, soulful, and divine experiences. But who I am is really I identify far more with my natural soul, my animal soul. And indeed, we do find that in Tanya, chapter 29, we've learned this in the Chabad Palm Beach Gardens very recently on YouTube, youtube.com/Jewish Gardens. We've learned youtube.com/Jewish Gardens at the Chabad Palm Beach Gardens quarantine broadcast page, Torah study page. We found that Tanya chapter 29 indeed says that it's only the righteous, the tzaddikim, whose essence is their godly soul. But for all the rest of us, those of us that have not yet slaughtered or subdued our natural soul, we are our natural soul. We identify with our natural soul. So Tanya seems to explicitly say, Tanya, which is the founding text of Chabad, from the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad philosophy, the first Rebbe. He says in chapter 29 that it's only the righteous, the tzaddikim, that are defined by their godly soul. All the rest of us, the intermediaries, the Beinanim, as well as the wicked, the rest of us are defined by our default, which is our natural soul. But the Rebbe, in a stunning revelation, friends, this is unbelievable. In a stunning chidush, a novel teaching, the Rebbe reinterpreted what the Alter Rebbe was talking about, and he refused to accept that we are defined by our self-centered soul, by our natural soul. The Rebbe taught, the Rebbe teaches that at the core of every single Jew is not his animal soul, his self-centered soul, but his God-centered soul, the soul which is literally a piece of God. Now, friends, for all of us that have studied Tanya, this is a groundbreaking revelation. It is absolutely stunning. If you've studied Tanya, then this is not much of the same. We're now going on a deep dive as the Rebbe is taking us by the hand and leading us through his understanding of the universe and of ourselves. He's walking us through the teachings of his predecessor, the first Rebbe of Chabad, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. And the Rebbe is telling us that when the Alter Rebbe said in Tanya chapter 29 that the Jew that is not a tzaddik is identified by his natural soul, that was only on a superficial level. But in truth, on an essence level, the core of every single Jew, whether he is righteous or wicked or intermediary, tzaddik, a rasha, or a beinoni, the essence of every single Jew is our godly soul. And the proof that the Rebbe brought to prove this is the fact that we observe every day that a Jew, even the least righteous Jew, is willing to die for his faith. We see it often. We hear about it in the news. If you remember that famous story of Daniel Pearl, that Washington Post journalist from Los Angeles, who was captured by Pakistani jihadist terrorists back maybe a decade ago or more. And before they beheaded him in a gruesome death, this secular Jew, non-observant, made sure to declare, I was born a Jew and I will die a Jew. He refused to convert, to accept another faith before he died. He died for what he believed in, and we've seen this throughout the generations, that even the least observant, the least religious of Jews are willing to die for their faith. What happens when you meet a Jew in a country club, not even eating kosher, he's eating treif, and somebody comes over to him and he says, you're a goy, you're not a Jew? Have you noticed how insulted, how indignated a Jew becomes? How dare you tell me that I'm not a Jew? Of course I'm a Jew. A Jew's faith is so deep that he's willing to die for this faith, and we've seen it in every single generation, including our own, so many times. That is the Rebbe's proof that we are defined by our godly soul. If our godly soul was only a guest within us, we wouldn't be willing to die for it. The Rebbe says that we are divine beings who spend the most of our time doing mundane things, just like a mother. Think of a mother who has a job 9 to 5, 8 hours a day. She's out of the house, she's in the office. So when you look at her schedule, you see she's spending her daylight hours in the office in the corporate world. And very few hours of her waking hours, she's actually with her kids. So is she more of a mother or is she more of an entrepreneur? Think about it. Obviously, we know that she's first and foremost a mother. If there would be a problem at home, she would drop everything at work and go back home. Not necessarily vice versa. When she's in the middle of her kids, if there's a problem at work, she wouldn't necessarily go to work. She's defined as a mother who spends most of her time, 8 hours a day, in the corporate office. The quantity of how we spend our time is not necessarily a reflection of who we are. So whilst we, as individuals, as Jews, might spend most of our daytime activities doing self-centered things, expressing our natural soul, that doesn't take away from the fact that at our core identity, who we really are deep down within is our godly soul. Let me read this text to you from the words of the Rebbe himself. In a sikha, in a talk, the Rebbe says as follows. Our primary identity is that of the divine soul, which is literally a piece of God above. Although Tanya chapter 29 states that the self-oriented consciousness constitutes the core of those who are not tzaddikim, who are not perfectly righteous, that statement of Tanya is only true superficially. The innermost and thus the truest part of our identity is our godly consciousness. As evidenced, again, the innermost and thus truest part of our identity is our godly consciousness, as evidenced by the willingness of every Jew, even those on the lowest rungs of spiritual sensitivity, to forfeit their lives rather than renounce their Jewish faith. Friends, this is a game-changing perspective of everything we've ever learned before. Even those of us who've learned Tanya, who've experienced the doctrine of dual consciousness, who are well aware and attuned to the fact that we have not one but two of us within our body, a godly soul and a natural soul. We've all made peace with the fact, even those of us who've studied Tanya, that we are defined by our natural soul. We are self-centered beings at our very core, by our very definition. But the Rebbe's perspective was so much deeper. The Rebbe says, no, you are not a selfish being. At your core, you are a godly being. Just like Andy's pointing out, who we are is not what we do. You're not defined by your actions, like the mother is not defined by her daytime hours being mostly preoccupied with work. She's still a mother, first and foremost. Ask her, she'll tell you. The Rebbe's perspective changes everything. And what we're about to do is see the implications, the consequences of this paradigm shift, the realization that who we are is not self-centered. Who we are is a piece of God. You know, Freud dug deep within the human consciousness. Sigmund Freud dug deep and he found schmutz. He found a misguided sexual attraction and he gave it a name. He called it the id. The id. But the Rebbe dug so much deeper than Freud. The Rebbe, who's a doctor of souls, who's a doctor of divinity, was able to dig so much deeper than Sigmund Freud and to find that the core of every Jew lies not the dysfunctional id, but the highly functional yid, the piece of godliness. Not the schmutz, but the diamond, the brilliant, glamorous, and dazzling diamond that lies at our core. From the Rebbe's perspective, our godly soul is not something that we have, but rather who we are. Now, you may ask yourself a question. You say, no, Rabbi Vigler, very nice. Very nice. Okay, so the Rebbe teaches us that the godly soul is what defines us. It is our core. It is our essence. Okay, but really that has very little bearing on my life. It doesn't make any difference to my life whatsoever. You know, I have brown eyes, and it's quite possible that in my genetic makeup I have a recessive blue gene, blue-eye gene, which would never express itself ever. I would only have brown eyes because the brown eye gene is dominant over the blue eye recessive gene. It would only be if my wife had a blue-eyed recessive gene. I think she actually has blue eyes. But if my wife would have a blue-eyed gene, whether recessive or dominant, then our children may or may not be blue-eyed. It doesn't really make any difference to my life if I have a blue-eye recessive gene or not. Is that what this is like? Okay, so I have a godly soul which is at my core, which makes no difference to my life. The Rebbe says no. When the Rebbe says that your godly soul, that the peace of God within you is your core, it is profound and it is tangible. Remember that word literally, which we mentioned earlier when we said we have two souls. We have a natural soul, which is self-centered, and a godly soul, which is literally a piece of God. Look at the extraordinary way that the Rebbe interprets the word literally. Take a look. Now the word mamash. The word mamash means literally. One might mistakenly conclude, this is from the Rebbe, one might mistakenly conclude that our resemblance to the divine is limited to our souls and the innermost recesses of our consciousness. And it is not overtly manifest, if not for our effort to reveal and act upon it from time to time. But it is not so. Our godly soul is a very real part of our expression. The Tanya, when describing the soul as being a part of God, adds the word mamash, literally, implying that the soul is actually a piece of God above and not merely godlike in some limited sense. But here's another interpretation, and this again is from a unique interpretation from the Rebbe. That when the Tanya says that our soul is literally a piece of God, it means not only is it literally a piece of God, but that it is a piece of God which is tangible in our daily experience. Literal and tangible and something which is able to be felt in our daily experience. Mamash, however, also translates as tangibly. This means that our divine core tangibly vivifies and manifests itself within our bodies and in all of its functions and activities. So much so that every movement of the body, a finger gesture or the like, even when we are involved in mundane activity, is actually a manifestation of the divine soul. What the Rebbe is telling us, that the godly soul, the peace of God within us, is not only literally a piece of God, but it is something literal, tangible, and felt in every thought, speech, and action that we do. It is something which we can and should relate to if we just get the glasses in the right focus. If we can get our paradigm shift glasses on, when we can see an X-ray vision, if you got the wrong microscope, you can't see what lies under your nose. If you've got the wrong lens, I guess, on the x-ray, you won't be able to see inside the body. If you've got the wrong lens in the telescope, you won't be able to see the right focus. But with the right glasses, you can see through who you are to find the peace of God in every single thing that you do, say, or think. Why is it? Why is it that our godly soul is the core of who we are and everything that we do, even when we're involved in mundane activity? The svara, the logic here is, the Rebbe's logic, is that our life itself comes from God. Since our life itself comes from God and our godly soul is a piece of God, it turns out that our ability to be alive must, by definition, come from our godly soul. It happens to go through the animal soul, the natural soul, but it is sourced in our true essence, in our godly soul. And with this perspective, we suddenly start to see ourselves and everything else around us in a whole new light. We suddenly realize that we are godly beings. Not that I'm a self-centered being who has godly experiences from time to time, but we realize that I am a godly being, and that is everything that I do is driven and powered by that godly soul. Now let's talk about this a moment. Let's try to understand this idea. The paradigm shift that the Rebbe introduces about how the Rebbe sees us, himself, all people. How does the Rebbe see a Jew? What is a Jew in the eyes of a Rebbe? A Jew is God himself. Now, we know that we do a lot of self-centered things. We eat because we are hungry for self-preservation. We sleep because we're tired for self-preservation. We procreate and we work for self-preservation. How can all of that be said to be an expression of the godly soul? For this, we have to go back to an idea that we introduced last week in the lesson, in Paradigm Shift Lesson 1, when we said that the reason that God created this world is because God wanted a dwelling place in this physical world, in this lowly spiritual world. When we remember that God created the world in order to have a dira betachtonim, because God wanted a world that was spiritually dark, so that in such a spiritually dark world where godliness is concealed, there God would be able to be recognized and crowned, coronated as king. When we realize that, it suddenly dawns upon us that our godly soul drives us to make money and to eat food in order that that food and that money is able to be used for a godly purpose, to fulfill the purpose of creation, to make for God a home in this physical world, the lowest of all the worlds. It is King David. Hi, Edith from the Philippines. Nice to meet you. Good to have you with us. It is King David who expresses this truth in Psalms. He says something so incredibly profound, which the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidus, explains. He says, Re'evim gam tzemeim. They're hungry and they're thirsty. King David speaks about us people, normal people. We eat and we drink. You know, you're thirsty, so I drink a little water. Very nice. But why are you thirsty, says King David? Re'evim gam tzemeim. They're hungry and they're thirsty. You know why? Nafsham bahem tis'ataf. It's because their soul pines within them. Our soul recognizes that this water that I'm about to drink needs to have needs to recognize the presence of God within it. It's not that I'm thirsty for the water, that I crave the chocolate because I am craving a selfish desire. The King David explains that the reason you crave chocolate or pickles or an omelet or a brisket is because your godly soul wants to bring the awareness of God into the brisket, the chocolate, the water, or the whatever else that you're eating. That's the reason that we have temptation. It is our godly soul that craves material possessions as a means of fulfilling the divine plan. Let's take a look at this idea in the words of the Rebbe. As souls vested in physical bodies, worldly concerns are closer to us, are closer to our hearts and interests, more than spiritual matters. But on a deeper level, however, the explanation for this phenomenon is that our souls sense and mirror God's desire to be present and felt in our physical experience. This is why we are moved to the depths of our souls when we ask God in the high holidays for material blessing. It is an expression of our deep-rooted desire to be granted the tools and resources that allow us to implement the divine plan to make this world a home for God. Friends, this changes our perception of reality on its head. Why do we crave money? Why do we crave homes, real estate, possessions, food, drink? Not only for physical need, that's on a very superficial level. The reason you want to buy that beautiful home, or you want to buy that business or that field, is because your godly soul senses that your mission in this world is to bring awareness of God in that business, in that field, in that piece of real estate, or in that banana. And that's the reason why our natural soul, our self-centered soul, is drawn to that particular food. Now, we might not be conscious of this truth. When you want to buy a house, you want to buy a house because you like the house. You like the house with the swimming pool, the house, with the trampoline, or with the giant backyard because you like the backyard. It is on a far deeper level, on an unconscious or a subconscious level, that this truth of the divine soul's aspiration and ambition is at play. But just because we're not aware of the truth, it doesn't mean that it's not there. Maybe you can try accessing this truth next time you crave something. Stop for a moment and think. Next time you crave something, maybe you can stop right now and think about something that you're trying to achieve, to obtain. A car, a field, real estate, a stock. Maybe you just want a good cup of coffee right now. Who knows? Whatever it is that you want, think for a moment and try to listen to the voice of your soul within. On a superficial level, you want it because it's self-serving, because you're hungry, you're tired, you want to be wealthy. But on a far deeper level, on a subatomic level, it is your godly soul that senses your purpose in this world to build for God a home in a spiritually dark world. And that is the motivation behind our every thought, speech, and action. It is our godly soul, which is our true core and essence, that drives absolutely everything that we do. That's what the Rebbe said earlier. When the Rebbe said, so much so that every movement of the body, a finger gesture or the like, even when we are involved in a mundane activity, is actually a manifestation of the divine soul. Friends, we can start tying everything together now. We've experienced the revolution. Who we are, our essence, our core, our truth, is our godly soul. Everything else is an expression of that, is a manifestation of our truest essence. We can now finally understand why it is that the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court, the 71 judges of Israel, when they would condemn a Jew to death, in the very rare occurrence that they would do so, if the guilty verdict was unanimous, the defendant was acquitted. The Rebbe explains that with the understanding that everything that we do is powered by our godly soul, by definition, there has to be a redeeming quality in everything that we do. Yes, the man might be guilty, but if even one single of the 71 judges was unable to find the redeeming quality in the defendant, it means that they didn't dig deep enough. It means that they were superficial in their judgment, that they weren't able to judge the defendant for who he was. They're applying the law for where the law is. They're not judging the defendant. They're just merely applying a law impersonally. And that's why it's acquitted. Let's look at this idea in the words of the Rabbi. Although the innate goodness in some people is thoroughly hidden, nevertheless, because goodness is not external to our being, but constitutes our very essence and is the truth of our existence, therefore, a trace of the person's concealed goodness inevitably must find some expression, accordingly to the defendant. Friends, this changes our perspective on ourselves. You know, there's a beautiful story of the Mechutin of the Alter Rebbe. The Mechutin is the man whose child married the child of the Alter Rebbe. His name was Rabbi Yitzchak of Berditchev, a great Kabbalist, himself a student of the Baal Shem Tov. Rabbi Yitzchak of Berditchev famously met a Jew who was smoking on Shabbos. And he said to him, Rabbi Yid, do you know that it's Shabbos? And the Jew says to Rabbi Leivik, he says, of course I know it's Shabbos. How can I know it's Shabbos? So then he says to him, maybe you didn't realize that you're smoking. To which the Jew says, of course I realized that I'm smoking. How could I not have realized that I'm smoking? I'm puffing right now. Then maybe, said Rabbi Leivik, maybe you didn't realize that smoking on Shabbos is prohibited. To which the Jew responded dispassionately. He says, actually I know that smoking on Shabbos is prohibited. And what does Rabbi Leivik do now? He turns up his hands to heaven and he says, Master of the universe, what an incredible people is your people, Israel. Even while he sins, he refuses to tell a lie. It was only Rabbi Yitzchak of Berditchev, the quintessential defendant of the Jewish people, the advocate of our people, who was able to find, even within this deliberate Shabbat violator, a redeeming quality that he refused to lie. He had to fulfill the will of God. A similar story is told of when Rabbi Yitzchak met a Jew who was saying the Shema Yisrael. You know, you're obligated to say the Shema twice a day. He was saying the Shema while he was oiling the wheels of his wagon. Now, the Shema we say while covering our eyes because you're not allowed to do anything while you're saying the Shema. While you're making that pledge of allegiance each morning and each evening, God is one. You're not allowed to do anything else. You're not supposed to check your cell phone. You're not supposed to be eating lunch. You're supposed to be covering your eyes, focusing only on the words of monotheism, on the pledge. But this Jew was saying the Shema while oiling the wheels of his wagon. And once again, Rabbi Yitzchak turns to God in heaven and he says, God, Master of the universe, how incredible is your people, Israel. Even while oiling the wheels of his wagon, he still declares Hashem Echad, that God is one. You see, that is a Jewish perspective. That is the ability to see within the sinner the redeeming quality. Within the failing, within the darkness, to find the light, to know that what powers each and every one of us is our godly soul. And therefore, even when we willfully sin, even when we're doing something explicitly wrong, it is powered by our godly soul. And therefore, there has to be a redeeming quality to what we're doing. Now, friends, once we've approached the fulcrum of what we're learning tonight, in lesson 2 of Paradigm Shift, we're redefining the Jew. We're redefining how the Rebbe sees us, how the Rebbe sees you and me. We've learned tonight so far, that the Rebbe sees each and every one of us as a piece of God. We're literally a piece of God, a manifest and tangible piece of God, which gains expression in every single thing that we do, whether it's good, bad, or ugly. Everything that we do is powered by the godly soul. And if you can't find the goodness in the bad that we do, then you haven't dug deep enough. So much so that this principle of the Rebbe has legal manifestation, has a legal consequence, in that the unanimous guilty verdict is disqualified. It's not merely an abstract philosophy. This is an idea that applies to actual application of the law, halachic ruling, that a unanimous guilty verdict is disqualified because you haven't found the redeeming quality in the murderer. But let's talk about the practical implications of this. How does this change my life? How does this change your life? What difference does it make? Very nice. My brain understands that at my core is the peace of God. Lovely. But what practical consequence has that got in my life? Is it possible for me to feel with my heart what my brain understands? That's what we're about to do tonight for the rest of this lesson. I'm going to give you 4 or 5 practical consequences, very real implications that will change your relationship with yourself, change your relationship with other people, and change your relationship with God and the universe based upon this essential paradigm shift of viewing ourselves not as something bad, something selfish, but as something pure, innocent, godly, as a brilliant light, a piece of God. You know, it was Rabbi Din Steinsaltz, a chassid from Jerusalem, whom Time magazine called a scholar of a millennium, who said, when describing what a Rebbe is, he said that if you're an eagle and you think that you're a duck, comes along a person and he picks you up and he throws you in the air and he shows you that you can fly, you can soar like an eagle. That is an extraordinary opportunity. That, says Rabbi Steinsaltz, that is what the Rebbe is doing to us. The Rebbe was teaching us about who we are. I think I know who I am, but it's the Rebbe who teaches us that we don't begin to understand the profound power, the light, the beauty, the majesty, and the splendor, which is who we are at our deepest core. We think that we're a duck. It's the Rebbe who introduces us to the idea that we can soar like an eagle. And now let's talk about the 5 or 4 practical consequences as we take this idea from Bina to Da'as. Remember, Chabad is Chachma, Bina, Da'as. Chachma is the idea, Bina is the understanding, and Da'as is the feeling. Chabad means a relentless intellectual attack on faith. Chabad means logic. It means to understand what we believe. But in that process of understanding what we believe, we go through the idea, which is Chachma. Bina is the understanding. And the process is incomplete if we don't touch on Da'as. Da'as, which is feeling. It's one thing, it's not enough to understand with your mind. You have to feel with your heart. And if the Rebbe teaches us here tonight that at the core of every Jew lies a piece of God, a soul, a godly soul, then let's take that into a level that we can actually feel and relate to in these 5 consequences I'm going to share with you right now. So we've learned so far that not only is our godly soul our true source, but it actually drives us in the most unexpected areas of our lives. Even the mundane and seemingly self-centered areas of our lives are really motivated by our godly soul's desire to make for God a home in this physical world, in that apple, in that piece of real estate, in that business, and in that vacation spot. Despite our lack of awareness, it is still true. Just like most of us have no clue how our bodies work. We don't have a clue what coronavirus is, how it hurts the human body. But the fact that we don't know about it doesn't mean that it's any less functional. Medicine is true even though most of us are oblivious. You know, there was a story of a chassid who came to visit the Rebbe Rashab, the 5th Chabad Rebbe. His name was Reb Manya Moneson, and he was a diamond dealer. So the Rebbe Rashab was asked, the 5th Chabad Rebbe was asking him all sorts of questions about various Jews, from where this chassid came from. And at one point, the chassid, Reb Manya, expressed surprise to the Rebbe. He was like, "What? Why are you so concerned about these simple Jews? Who cares? They're just ordinary farmers and bakers and cobblers. Who cares? They're nothing special." To which the Rebbe responded to the question with a question. He says, "Tell me, Rebanya, you're a diamond dealer. Can I see some of your diamonds?" Rebanya says, "Of course." And he brings out some of his diamonds and he shows them to the Rebbe, and this one is worth this much and this one is worth that much. And he was explaining to him about how special this diamond is and how special that diamond is. To which the Rebbe says, "You know, frankly, I don't know what you're talking about. These diamonds don't look at all special to me. They look like just regular rocks. And Ramanya smiled at the Rebbe and he says, Rebbe, frankly, you have to be a maven. You've got to be a maven to be able to appreciate diamonds. Said the Rebbe. And if you want to understand souls, if you want to understand the value of a Jew, frankly, you've got to be a maven. You've got to be able to know what you're looking at. You've got to be able to realize how every single Jew is effectively a diamond. There was a famous story of how the Rebbe would give out dollars every Sunday for hours and hours and hours on end. The Rebbe would give out dollars, giving blessings to tens of thousands of Jews, men, women, and children, young and old, Jew and non-Jew, who stood in line for a blessing. At one point, an elderly woman came by. She says, Rebbe, I've been standing in line for hours and I'm exhausted. I'm not even as old as you are. How do you get the koyach? Where do you get the strength to stand on your feet for so many hours without a break? To which the Rebbe looked at her with a smile and he says, when you're counting diamonds, you never get tired. If I was counting schmutz or rocks or problems, I'd get tired. But each and every single Jew that comes my way, the Rebbe sees each and every one of us as a diamond, as a piece of God. How can I get tired when I'm counting my money? How can I get tired when I'm counting diamonds? So let's take a look at the 5 implications of tonight's paradigm shift, of the realization that each and every one of us is at our core a piece of God. So for the first implication, it changes how we view ourselves. You see, most people today suffer from problems of insecurity and lack of self-esteem. For whatever reason, whether it's an abusive childhood, traumatic experiences, multiple reasons, people today suffer, and they probably have always suffered, from a lack of self-esteem. And that's the reason why we find very creative ways to compensate for that. You know, Abraham Twersky is a noted rabbi, philosopher, and psychologist from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, I believe. He's written over 60 books. And he famously said that he could summarize all the books that he ever wrote about human psychology. He's a very, very well-respected psychologist. He could summarize all the books he ever wrote in one book, in one word, and that is lack of self-esteem. We all suffer from it. And we find creative ways to overcompensate, to compensate for our lack of self-esteem. You got at least 4 ways where you'll find people compensating for the lack of self-esteem. You have the overachievers. Those are the workaholics, the people that work so incredibly hard that you look at them and you say, wow, that guy's amazing. That's a person whom you may call codependent because they need to define themselves not by who they are, but by what they do. You know, they say that children of child abuse will either become PhDs or drug addicts. Why would they become PhDs? Because they're so codependent. They have such a shattered sense of self-esteem because of their child abuse that they need to overcompensate for it with an overachiever, being an overachiever. Another person will compensate for the lack of self-esteem by pushing other people down. If I push you lower, it means I'm higher. When I talk about them and us, it gives me definition. Maybe that's why this country is so incredibly polarized right now. With masks, without masks, Democrats, Republicans, all sorts of them and us. We're so incredibly polarized, it's terrifying. It's scary. But it's when you're able to affiliate with your team, with your soccer team, your football team, your baseball team, your political team, your echo chamber, that's when you feel like you're part of something bigger. There's them, the bad guys, and us, the enlightened ones. That gives us a sense of self-esteem when we're able to be nasty to other people, to condescend and speak condescendingly towards other people. A third way in which we try to compensate for a lack of self-esteem is by anesthetizing our pain. People will anesthetize, will numb their pain through all sorts of addictions like sex addiction, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, people addiction. People are addicted to people, addicted to love addiction, work addiction. There's even something called religion addiction. This is people that embrace religion in an unhealthy way. Their embrace of religion is one which is very critical of other people. It's very brittle. It's not organic. It's not beautiful. Because their embrace of religion is one that defines them and gives them a routine, gives them an identity because of their shattered sense of self, their lack of self-esteem. So that is an addiction. Religion can be an addiction just like money or sex or alcohol or drugs. And finally, you have another group of people that are deal with their lack of self-esteem by being a people pleaser. They just please other people so that they can constantly get compliments from other people, constantly numb their pain, their lack of self-esteem. Let's take a look at the words of Abraham Tversky, the psychologist I just mentioned in his book, Seek Sobriety, Find Serenity. If we know that we are great, we do not have to prove it. Little children climb onto a chair or table and announce, see how big I am. I can almost touch the ceiling. That's a baby, a child. All that changes when we grow up is that we do not stand on chairs to demonstrate our height. The underlying pattern is unchanged, however. In whatever way we feel small, we try to show that we're big without climbing on the table. We see people who are name droppers or who otherwise try to impress people with their importance. We think what a huge inflated ego that person has. Actually, the person feels terribly depleted and acts in desperation to convince others of his or her importance. This person wants to have a feeling of self-worth, hoping to hear the equivalent of, look how big Johnny is, when little Johnny stands on the chair. Tversky observes that even adults are just like kids. We're desperate for one thing: validation. There's even a website called celebforaday.com, which for a handsome fee will allow a group of paparazzi to chase you down all day long for one day, to make you feel like a celebrity, and you can choose to give or not give autographs. People, strangers walking by will say, who's that? I never heard of that person before. And they'll come in for your autograph and you'll feel like $1 million. Maybe it'll cost you $1 million. These are people that are desperate to fill a gaping hole within them, their broken self-esteem. If your happiness depends on other people's approval, you'll always be miserable. So what's the cure to this human malady? The cure is the Rebbe's perception of us. If we can perceive ourselves the way that the Rebbe perceives ourselves, if we're able to see ourselves not as self-centered, as always needing more, but as God-centered, as literally a piece of God, if we have the maturity to do that, then just like God is, so too we are an expression of God's essence. God doesn't need any reason to exist. He always was, He is, and He will be. As we say in Adon Olam, Vehu Haya, He was, Vehu Haveh, and He is, Vehu Yihya, and He always will be. God has no lack of self-esteem. God is ever present. Just like God is always and forever, so too, when we can recognize and embrace that our core is our godly essence, it's then that we can finally make peace with ourselves and realize that we don't need anybody else to validate us. I am worthy. I deserve. I am good. I was chosen. I was chosen by God. Instead of saying, I think, therefore I am, the Rebbe's approach is to say, I am a piece of God. I am. Therefore I think. When I realize that in my core lies a piece of divinity, a piece of God's essence, I don't need to prove myself through overachieving. I don't need to anesthetize my pain. I don't need someone else to validate my pain. I don't need to suppress someone else in order to make myself higher. I am already worthy because I am God. I am like God. Self-respect has to come from who we are, not from what we do. If we can adopt the Rebbe's perception of us, to see ourselves as a piece of God, right away we will lose what I believe in my personal counseling of other people is the number one problem in broken relationships, whether they are divorce, estrangement between siblings, parents and children. It's always a broken sense of self-esteem, that the other is not validating me enough, and I'm sick and tired of having to depend on them to validate me. Even if your husband or wife is validating you constantly, comes one day and they're not validating you enough, that's when the spaghetti hits the fan. You're never going to be able to validate yourself enough if you're driven by a sense of ego, by a sense of self, a sense of self. Your self-centered core is never going to be able to be satisfied. It is the impossible pursuit of happiness. You're never going to actually reach there if you're looking to satisfy your ego. But when you realize that your core is not ego, your core is not self, your core is a piece of God, then I'm present, I am good, I am worthy, without anyone else on the outside needing to validate that truth. And that, my friends, is the first of 5 implications and consequences of tonight's core paradigm shift. That who we are is our godly soul, even though most of what we do is not necessarily or not openly an expression of that. A second impact that's going to come out, I think it was Oprah who said that if we focus on what we have and what we don't have, we'll never have enough. If we focus on what we don't have, we'll never have enough. But if we focus on what we do have, we'll always have more. So when we come from a perspective of what we don't have, how we need other people to validate us, how we need other people to notice us, how we need other people to compliment us, how we need other people to tell us how amazing and wonderful and incredibly beautiful we are, you'll never get enough. But when you're rooted in your divine consciousness, when you adopt the approach of the Rebbe, which is so much deeper than the approach of the Alter Rebbe. In chapter 29, the Alter Rebbe says that a regular Jew who's not a tzaddik is really defined by his animal soul, by his natural soul. The Rebbe says, no! That's only on a superficial level, but on a true essence level. Every Jew is defined by your godly soul, and if you could take a moment to reflect on this truth, you will no longer, from this moment on, you will no longer need your brother-in-law to validate you, your wife or your husband or your child or your parent to tell you how amazing you are. You will feel good on your own. This, my friends, is the key to healthy relationships. If we don't have a healthy relationship with ourselves, it is impossible for us to have a healthy relationship with someone else. And that leads me to the second consequence, the second practical implication, the second das, realization, the feeling of this idea, this wisdom that we understood with our brain, we're now feeling with our hearts as we apply it to the human relationships in our lives. You see, King Solomon tells us that human beings are like mirrors. What I feel about someone else is a reflection of what they feel about me. If you want to know what anyone else feels about you, just think about how you feel about them. If you love them, they'll probably love you. If you hate them or distrust them, they probably feel the same way about you. Applying that same wisdom of human hearts being like mirrors, if we don't have a healthy relationship with ourselves, there's no way we can have a healthy relationship with others. If we view ourselves as needy, driven by ego, then that's how we look at others. And other people are a threat to our identity. Their success is a threat to my success. But when I see myself as divine, as a piece of God, then I have no problem seeing someone else also as a piece of God. I'm at peace with you. I take joy in your success. You know that word Schadenfreude? I believe it's a German word. Only the Germans could have come up with such a word. Schadenfreude, which means to take joy in the pain of someone else. It's such a Nazi word. Taking joy in the pain of someone else. Someone who identifies as a piece of God, how could they ever take joy in the pain of someone else? It's only when you view yourself as egocentric, as self-centered, that anyone else is a threat to me, and therefore I take great joy in your pain. Schadenfreude. But a Jew who's enlightened, a Jew of higher consciousness, a chassid of the Rebbe, someone who's able to see himself as the Rebbe sees him, says, I am a piece of God. I don't need anyone else to validate me. I'm not threatened by anybody else. I already am worthy by mere virtue of God having chosen to invest himself within me. In the words of Rabbi Tzvi Freeman, a chassid of the Rebbe in our generation, he says, you cannot reach deeper within another than you can reach within your own self. If you love yourself for your achievements and your current assets, for the way you do things and handle the world, and if you despise yourself for failure in the same, it follows that your relationship with another will also be transient and superficial. To achieve deep and lasting love of another person, you need to first experience that depth within yourself, an inner core that doesn't change with time or events. If it is the true essence, it is an essence shared by the other person as well, and deep love becomes unavoidable. When I realize that my core is godly and your core is godly, I realize that you're an expression of me. I'm an extension of you. We're one and the same. Your success is my success. My success is your success. The only way that we can ever reach a true state of Ahavas Yisrael, of loving a fellow like yourself, to love your fellow like yourself, as the Torah instructs us, is only when we're able to see ourselves as a piece of God. We then are able to see the piece of God in someone else, to see how you are an expression of me, I'm an extension of you, we're one, we're the same. And instead of me being intimidated by you, I am strengthened by you. Let's talk now about a third of 5 implications of this paradigm shift we learned tonight, that who we are at our core is a godly essence, a piece of God. I'd like you to meet one of the baddest women of Jewish history. Her name was Miriam Bas Bilga. Documented in the Talmud at the very end of Tractate Sukkah, the Talmud tells us Miriam, the daughter of Bilga, was from a family of priests. During the Hanukkah story, she apostatized and married a Syrian Greek military officer. Can you imagine? This woman converted and married the enemy. When the Syrian Greeks invaded the sanctuary, she joined them. She kicked the altar with her sandal and cried out, "Lucus, lucus, wolf, wolf. How long will you consume Israel's money but not come to their assistance in the time of their distress?" This is the story of Miriam Bas Bilga, a woman who abandoned her people, slept with the enemy, and followed them into the temple to add insult to injury by beating the altar. Now, when the Talmud criticizes her, it's funny, it's interesting. The Rabbi asks the question, why would we criticize her for her relatively minor offense of beating the altar when her real offense was converting out of Judaism and marrying the Syrian Greek general who conquered the temple? Why would you emphasize a seemingly trivial violation when she was guilty of so much more? And here the Rebbe says that in fact the Talmud is not out to criticize Miriam Bas Bilga. What the Talmud is out to do is to show that a Jewish soul is never lost to her people. What the Talmud is out to show us is that since our core is a piece of God, you can never abandon your true essence. Even a woman who converted out of the faith and married a Syrian Greek general and followed him into the temple, what was her problem? Why is God not protecting his people? She still cried out for the pain of her people. She could never have severed her connection with her people because at her core, she is a piece of God. Let's take a look at this idea in the words of the Rebbe. Miriam apostatized. She wedded an enemy of the Jewish people and was part of the entourage that invaded the temple and offered a swine upon the altar. Despite all this, the sages make an issue of the fact that she disrespectfully struck the altar with her sandal. Why did the sages focus on this act, asks the Rebbe? Isn't this offense far eclipsed by the fact that she severed her ties with their Jewish heritage? Says the Rebbe, no. Absolutely not. What severed? Where severed? Says the Rebbe. Such a notion of a Jew separating from their people is an utter impossibility. Her failings were only external to her true identity. Although a Jewish girl rejects her faith, God forbid, and marries an enemy of our people, nevertheless, because she is intimately connected with God, he still cares how she behaves when she approaches the altar. This demonstrates, says the Rebbe, the greatness of the soul. No matter our external spiritual states, and no matter the depraved depths to which we may sink, our souls remain faithful to God, even at the moment of our failing. You see, when it comes to Miriam Bas Bilga, the story of the Talmud shows us she uses Miriam Bas Bilga as an example, as a case study of the unbreakable bond that a Jew has with God. You see, if her bond was broken, then who cares about her behavior? Obviously, she behaved that way. It's far from surprising. It's only because we're never defined by our sins, because we always remain pure to our godly essence. That is why the Talmud brings us the story to tell us that even the most secular, apostate and heretic Jew is always still a Jew, because at our core, we're a piece of God. And the Rebbe here continues, Miriam rejected her faith. She married the enemy and joined the invasion of the temple. Nevertheless, what bothered her was why the altar was not protecting the Jews. We see here the essence of a Jewish daughter. Miriam married an officer who waged war against the Jewish people, conquered Jerusalem and invaded the temple and desecrated its altar. And yet she went along with him, associating herself with the enemy's cause. Still, when she observed the tragedy that was befalling the fellow Jews, she screamed, "Wolf, wolf, why do you not come to the assistance of the Jews?" This, my friends, is our third consequence of the implication of our core being godly. If our essence is a piece of God, a Jew can never, by definition, be lost to his people. You know, people would sometimes write to the Rebbe that they're feeling depressed because of their sins. They're feeling unholy because of their sins. And the Rebbe's response was phenomenal. The Rebbe said, Hesach hadas, ignore it. Ignore that which causes you depression. Ignore the sin. How could it be that the Rebbe tells them to ignore their sin? What, isn't their sin important? What the Rebbe was effectively telling them is, don't tell me that you're unholy because of the sin. It's the sin that's unholy. You're a Jew. You're a piece of God. You're forever light. You're forever holy. You're forever pure. Don't define yourself by your sin. It's the sin that's unholy. Forget about it. Let it go. Go back to your core. There was a beautiful story of a Holocaust survivor who saw the worst, what we can't imagine in our worst nightmare. That's what he saw in his concentration camp experience. And after the war, a religious Jew saw him smoking on Shabbos, violating the Shabbos. When someone asked this Jew about how he has any respect for a Jew that smokes on Shabbos, the religious Jew said, it's not the Holocaust survivor that's smoking on Shabbos. It's the Nazi that's smoking on Shabbos. It's the Nazi within him, the Nazi that abused him, that broke him, the Nazi that persecuted him and tortured him. That's what's smoking on Shabbos. But this fellow Jew, the Holocaust survivor, that's my brother, that's a piece of God. We don't define ourselves by our mistakes. Let us too not define anyone else or ourselves by our faults, but rather by our essence. You know, there was a story, a horrifying story, in November 19th, 2013, when Virginia State Senator Robert Cray Deeds was critically wounded when he was stabbed multiple times by his son, Austin Gus Deeds. Gus was suffering from a bipolar disorder, and after attacking his father with multiple stab wounds, he committed suicide. And it was fascinating what his father, Senator Bob Creeds, said afterwards. He says, I really don't want Gus to be defined by his illness. I don't want Gus to be defined by what happened on the 19th of November 2013. Gus was a great kid. He was a perfect son. I want people to remember the brilliant, friendly, loving kid that was Gus Dietz. Why do we have to define Gus Dietz by the one day that he lost his cool and he went crazy and he stabbed his father and he killed himself? Here you have a kid who was a beautiful kid for 34.9 years, and for the last few days of his life, he probably lost his mind. Why define him by that one horrible act that he did? The act was horrible, but the kid was good. When we educate our children in our house, we never, ever, ever say to them, you're a bad kid. God forbid. We always make sure to say to our kids, what you did was bad. The choice that you chose to make, that was evil. But you, my daughter, you, my child, you are beautiful. You are holy. You are precious. This is actually a piece of wisdom which I see. My wife is with us here, Hannah. It's actually my wife taught me this idea. I have to give her the full credit for this. When I once made the mistake of saying something to my child, Hannah pointed out and she says, no. Never ever say that the child is bad. The child is always pure and holy. The child is always good. It's the deed that was bad. It was the choice that was poor. And that, my friends, we can apply to our own wisdom as well. Let us not define ourselves by some poor judgment that we made. Every one of us has poor judgment once in a while. Does that define us? God forbid. A Jew is a Jew is a Jew. A Jew is a piece of God. A Jew is a brilliant light that can never be extinguished. Yes, there's some dust on that light, but don't define yourself by the speck of dust. You have a beautiful house and there's a stain in the middle of the room. Do you define the room by the stain? You have a beautiful garden and you have a rock in the middle. Does that mean you have a rock? Or you have a beautiful garden with a rock? Don't define yourself by the rock. See, Corey, thank you. Andy says that's a great point to emphasize and re-emphasize. One's essence is holy and unchanged by errors, mistakes, sins, wrong turns that we took. We did bad. We are not bad. Exactly, Andy. And that really is going to tie in beautifully with a point that I'm going to bring up in a few moments about teshuvah, about why teshuvah, repentance, is something. How can you reverse something bad that you've done? We're going to talk about that in a moment. I want to give another example over here, is that we spoke last week about special needs children. Special children. We spoke yesterday about special children and how the Rebbe refused to call wounded soldiers handicapped soldiers. He called them exceptional soldiers. And he refused to call handicapped children handicapped. He called them special children, because we learned last week the fairness doctrine that whenever God takes away something from us, a deficiency, he compensates us with a surplus somewhere else. Why define yourself by what you don't have, by your missing arm, when you could define yourself by your added sensitivity, your added wisdom, your added courage, your added anything? Define yourself by your surplus. Don't define yourself by your deficiency. And that's why the Rebbe would refuse to call them secular Jews. Someone said to the Rebbe, he's working with secular Jews. The Rebbe says, I didn't even know what a secular Jew is. A Jew is holy. His behavior might be exhibiting a lack of religious observance, okay? But that doesn't mean he's secular. A Jew by definition is holy. To call a Jew secular is a contradiction in terms. It is a profound misunderstanding on the definition of a Jew, a piece of God. If you can call him a secular Jew, it's like saying a secular piece of God. What does that mean, a secular piece of God? That doesn't even make any sense. And this, my friends, is the third of the 5 implications, the 5 consequences, the 5 das moments, taking the wisdom that we've understood in Bina, the paradigm shift, how the core of us is our godly core, and applying that into our das, into the way we feel, taking what we understand with our brain into something that we feel with our heart. We spoke about the implications of how this affects how we view ourselves, how we view others, and how we view our deficiencies as well as the deficiencies of others. And this leads me to the 4th of the 5 implications. In a letter that the Rebbe wrote to the Prime Minister Sorry, the president of Israel, one of the first presidents of Israel, Mr. Zalman Shazar. Shneir Zalman Shazar was actually his name. The Rebbe wrote to him and he said that every Jew is really, every so often, when I look at this gift that you gave me, I can't help but think that truthfully we are all Marranos. Marranos are the secret Jews that lived in the Spanish Inquisition. Jews who were forced to live outwardly as Christians, even though inwardly they were Jews. We are all conversos to a degree, perhaps even to a great degree, inasmuch as we act in many ways, upon direct or indirect societal pressures. At the very least, we are conversos due to an internal coercion. As the great teacher Maimonides wrote, we are induced by the evil inclination to act in manners inconsistent with our true will. For in truth we want to be part of the Jewish nation. We want in truth to fulfill all of God's commandments, and we want to distance ourselves from wrongdoing. Every single Jew wants to serve God lovingly. Every single Jew wants to learn Torah and do mitzvahs. It's only that we have external societal pressures or internal problems that block us from being who we truly want to be. In a video that I shared this morning in our daily Torah study at youtube.com/Jewish Gardens, the Rebbe speaks to a woman who expresses a desire to grow in Torah and mitzvahs. The Rebbe says to her, but don't do it because I'm telling you to do it. Do it because that's who you are. At your core, at your essence, you're a piece of God. And this is what you want to do. Your organic self is to serve God. If you're true to your true self, true to thine self, like they like to say today, you will do Torah and mitzvahs because your true essence is God. God is not an external foreigner telling you what to do. God is who you are at your very core. What that means is we're never in conflict with God. If you feel that God is asking too much of you, it's not even possible. It's not that there's me against God. It's me and God against my self-centered natural soul. That's what's going on over here. Me and God is one thing. And it's the natural soul, the self-centered soul that's trying to lead me away, trying to confuse me, that's trying to lead me astray from my true self, trying to make me do things that I don't really want to do. That is the cause of our conflict. This is why we learned last week that the Rebbe says this world is not a jungle where there seems to be anarchy. This world is a beautiful garden where God is totally in charge all the time. It's just that we have to have the right glasses on to be able to see the presence of God all around us through the suffering, through the sin, and through the obstacles all around us. In our personal spiritual struggles, instead of seeing God as the enemy, as something that's forcing us to do things that we don't want to do, when we realize that my core is God, I can never be in conflict with the will of God. What God tells me to do is what I want to do. It's not some foreign alien government that's trying to make my life miserable. And this, my friends, is the reason why we do teshuvah. Teshuvah is often mistranslated as repentance, as if to say that you're going to go from a state of bad to a state of good, to become something that you're not. Teshuvah doesn't actually mean repentance. It means return. Return back to your core. Return to your natural, organic goodness. That's what teshuvah means. Being who you truly are in your deepest essence. The Rebbe's words, in truth, the term returning to the source, used to describe people who embrace the path of Torah, is inappropriate. The word source implies a faraway entity, one that one must travel great distances to reach. The reality, however, is that because, as stated above in Tanya, we all have a divine soul, we do not need to traverse great distances to arrive at our source. It is there already in our hearts and minds. We need only to remove the cover that conceals it. You want to do teshuvah, be true to yourself. Just be yourself. That's what teshuvah means. Return to your true default settings. Don't become something that you're not. And finally, some people feel hypocritical when they become religious. I keep Shabbos, but my friends are going to say that I'm hypocritical for keeping Shabbos, for doing mitzvahs, for davening every day, for laying tefillin. But in truth, you can't possibly be hypocritical when you do a mitzvah, because that is your truest essence. Your soul is a piece of God. So when you do a mitzvah, you're being true to yourself. You're not being hypocritical. On the contrary, when you're not eating kosher, when you're violating the Shabbos, that's when you're being hypocritical. In the Rebbe's words, the incongruity lies not in acting according to Torah and mitzvahs, rather it lies in acting contrary to Torah and mitzvahs. That's when you're being hypocritical. And that's, by the way, the reason that the Rebbe introduced 10 mitzvah campaigns. The Rebbe introduced, you'll often find Chabadniks in the street that will stop you. Excuse me, are you Jewish? Would you like to light tefillin? Would you like to light Shabbos candles? There are 10 mitzvah campaigns. Tefillin, Torah study, mezuzah, tzedakah, charity, home filled with holy books, Torah books, Shabbos candles, and Yontif candles, kosher, family purity, which is the laws of the mikvah, Jewish education, and the loving of your fellow Jew. These 10 mitzvah campaigns aren't just random mitzvahs that don't have any impact on your life. When a Jew stops in the street from Manhattan for a moment, and he lays tefillin for 2 minutes, when a Jew puts a coin in the charity box, when a Jew spends 5 minutes to learn Torah, or to love their fellow Jew unconditionally, or a woman lights Shabbos candles, what that is that they're experiencing a moment of true equilibrium, where their outside is perfectly consistent with their inside. And that is very healing. Don't think of yourself as binary, as either I'm fully religious or I'm not fully religious. It's everything or nothing. No. The Rebbe's approach is very, very beautiful. Each and every mitzvah is a moment of sanity. It's a moment of health, of presence, of expression of your deepest core. When you do a mitzvah for even 5 seconds, you've experienced peace, balance, and equilibrium, which will shine the light of your core to the outside and hopefully have an impact upon everything else in your life. And finally, this leads me to the fifth and final implication of the consequence, the das, the expression, the feeling of our paradigm shift tonight, to realize that at our core is a piece of God. Friends, we are far more powerful than we ever dreamed possible. In his opening discourse on 1951, the night that the Rebbe accepted the mantle of leadership of the Chabad movement, the Rebbe said, each and every one of us must yearn to aspire to be like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, a task which seems out of this world and impossible. But it was when we realized how the Rebbe saw us, when we realized that the Rebbe knows that each and every one of us is a piece of God, infinitely powerful. Why shouldn't you be like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? We can exceed our goals. You will exceed our goals. Like my wife and I like to say, if your dreams don't scare you, then they're not big enough. We can do whatever we set our minds to, because at our core, we're infinitely powerful. We're a piece of God. How else could we make for God a home in this physical world? If not, that we harbored the power of infinity. How else could we make a home for infinity in this physical world? The problem is that we don't believe in our own power. You know, there was a shliach, an ambassador, an emissary of the Rebbe in, I think it was in Boston, who wrote to the Rebbe that he didn't have what it takes to fulfill the mission of the Rebbe. It was too hard for him to do what the Rebbe asked him to do, to be the Rebbe's shliach in Boston or somewhere there in New England. And the Rebbe wrote to him the most beautiful letter. Friends, listen to what the Rebbe wrote to him. The Rebbe said, I preempted you and I responded to you even before you made your request. I already did precisely as you advised. I've given you the tools. Rabbi Moshe Yitzchak Hecht was sent to your city. It appears from your letter and from the previous ones that you are unfamiliar with Rabbi Hecht or the abilities and powers that he has been granted. In any event, endeavor now to acquaint yourself with him, and immediately everything will change. Your disposition, your trust in God, your everyday joy, etc. Friends, you know who the Rebbe wrote this letter to? You might have guessed it, to Rabbi Moshe Yitzchak Hecht. This is the man that says, Rabbi, I can't do this anymore. It is too hard for me to be your emissary in New England. And the Rebbe said, I've already sent a man over there who you obviously don't know, a man who knows what to do, who has what it takes, who has been endowed with everything that he needs to make it happen. And his name is yours truly, Rabbi Moshe Yitzchak Hecht. What the Rebbe was saying, you don't realize the intensity of the power The infinity that you harbor in the palm of your hands. Nothing can stop you. You are your own worst enemy. And when Chana and I have an uncle who lives in New Hampshire. He runs the Chabad of New Hampshire. And when he was a yeshiva student, he went to Curaçao to do emissary shlichus work of the Rebbe out there. And a Jew wrote from Curaçao. He wrote to the Rebbe, I'd like to extend to you, Rebbe, my most sincere appreciation and other good feelings. Just tell the Rebbe that a small Jew from Curaçao felt that the Rebbe touched my soul. The Rebbe's response to this Jew was, I'm pleased to receive your regards through our esteemed mutual friends, this Jew from Curaçao. He says, I must, however, take exception to your referencing to yourself as a small Jew from Curaçao. There is surely no need to emphasize that to you at length, that every Jew, man or woman, has a godly soul, which is a part of God above. As explained in Tanya, beginning of chapter 2, thus there is no such thing as a small Jew, and a Jew must never underestimate his or her tremendous potential. Friends, we can change the world. We have been endowed with more power than humanity has ever known. That is what it means to be chosen. That God invested a piece of his own infinity within each and every one of us. And if we only don't stand in our own way, we will be able to change the world. Friends, this is why. It is these reasons that we can finally wrap up and understand the Rebbe's relentless push for us to progress. Constantly progress, despite the fact that the Rebbe loved us all unconditionally. You see, the Rebbe's push for us to constantly improve ourselves originated not in his belief that we are inadequate. It originated in his inherent belief in our indescribable greatness. That is why the Rebbe pushed us. I accept you for who you are, but who you are is infinite and unlimited. Keep climbing. Don't stop. Don't limit yourself. The Rebbe believes in us more than we ever dreamed possible. Certainly the Rebbe believes in us more than we believe in ourselves. The Rebbe called for us to change the world, to bring Mashiach, to bring the godly purpose of creation to its purpose, to its fulfillment in our generation. And the Rebbe promised us it's going to happen. Because the Rebbe knew that we harbor infinity. When we sense that someone else believes in us, believes in our inherent greatness, then we also tend to start to believe in ourselves as well. It feels really good. This is why the Rebbe was so incredibly charismatic and beloved, despite constantly pushing us to reinvent ourselves. When someone came to the Rebbe, a leader of the Jewish Federation somewhere in America, and she said that she had designated $250,000 to the Rebbe's schools in that part of America, the Rebbe looked at her and he said, and you expect me to be satisfied with $250,000? You look at this video and you say, oh my God, this woman is never going to have anything to do with Chabad ever again. But no, she loved what the Rebbe said because she inherently and subconsciously sensed that this was coming from a place of deep love and admiration. I'm grateful for the $250,000. But is that all you can do? You're infinitely powerful. You're so much greater than you ever dreamed yourself possible. Don't stop, keep climbing. Friends, together, we can change the world. And that's what we've done tonight, is that we've redefined our definition of ourselves. Our paradigm shift tonight was to reinterpret how we view ourselves, not as broken, not as needy, but as unbreakable, as infinitely powerful, as a piece of God. We need no validation from anyone outside of ourselves. We can love everyone else and enjoy in their successes because no one else is a threat to me. We don't need to define ourselves by our failings. We recognize that our failings are just that. They're our failings. but they don't define us. We know that our relationship with God is organic, and there is no hypocrisy in becoming more religious and more connected with God. And we finally realize that we are far more powerful than we ever dreamed possible. That is tonight's paradigm shift on the 26th yahrzeit of the Rebbe's passing on the 3rd of Tammuz. We connect with our Rebbe through his teachings. And it's my sincere hope and prayer that you be inspired, as I am inspired, and even more than I am inspired, to be able to redefine your perception of self and your perception of the world around you, to allow the Rebbe to live through you, to bring the Rebbe's teachings, the Rebbe's extraordinary transformational perception of reality, to bring you to happiness, to functional relationships, to joy, and to peace with your God in heaven. Next week, Thursday night, 8 o'clock, we're going to be moving into the third of 6 paradigm shifts, of 6 transformational ideas, as we redefine our understanding, not of the world as in lesson 1, not of ourselves as in lesson 2, but of Torah and why it is vital for our functional living. I invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more daily Torah inspiration at youtube.com/Jewish Gardens. That's youtube.com/Jewish Gardens, where you can subscribe with the big red subscribe button to our YouTube channel, and follow us on Facebook for daily Torah study at facebook.com/Jewish Gardens. That's facebook.com/Jewish Gardens. I'd like to conclude with the L'chaim. May the Rebbe live through us, through our living and breathing and walking and talking his teachings, these transformative teachings, the Rebbe's gift to the world. L'chaim, shalom. Please send me an email to rabbi@jewishgardens.com. Would love to hear from you, your thoughts, feedback, and reflection. My email is rabbi@jewishgardens.com. Please share this video, like the video, share the video, to spread the light of Torah, to spread the light of the Rebbe as far as is humanly possible and beyond. Thank you very much. Over and out.